Sudan is the world's largest humanitarian crisis, and it is a gigantic moral failure of the world that nobody talks about it. And so I'm going to explain what's going on because it's tragic and it just shouldn't be happening. To set the stage of what's going on, Sudan is a huge country being marred by civil war. It previously had a 2-decade-long civil war that resulted in the splitting of the country in two. So now there's Sudan and South Sudan. This is about Sudan, which is in a new civil war. 14 million people displaced, tens of millions suffering from famine. Sudan is a huge country, both by area and population. It's like over 50 million people, almost all of them suffering from famine and war. Hundreds of thousands of people dead, rampant assault being used as like a war weapon, genocide being conducted against the sedentary African tribes in the Darfur region, which was previously the site of a genocide in the last civil war. And so this war is being fought principally because of two men. General Dagalo, known as Hemeti, who leads this group called the Rapid Support Forces, which are like basically an army of militias that he's like thrown together into this like makeshift resistance that's fighting against General al-Burhan, who is basically the de facto leader of the Sudanese state. Now, these two people used to be allies, Hemeti and al-Burhan. They have led basically two coups that eliminated democracy in the country, and then they began fighting. So they fight for different reasons, and this is like a situation where both of them are evil. And to different degrees, I suppose, but both are evil. So Hemeti he was a camel trader. He arose in these groups of militias called the Janjaweed militias that are basically like roving gangs that, under the guise of protecting different groups that they believe in, murder, assault, pillage, destroy, conduct genocide. And he leads them. He arose from them in like the last civil war as like a skilled military commander. He didn't like the general like taking power. They were supposed to be in this coup. He's very wealthy and has this ability to form this like patronage network because he and his family own a bunch of gold mines that do trade with the Middle East. And he has tons of money. And he has taken the western side of the country, and the government has retained the eastern side of the country. This is to loose degrees. And both are committing war crimes. So like I said, the Janjaweed militias that are the rapid support forces that have been coalesced behind Hemeti, this general, they conduct genocide. And the tensions in Sudan are long standing. They're not from colonialism, although colonialism enhances these racial tensions. It's not even racial, actually, but these ethnic tensions. And the central tension in Sudan is between the Arab ruling class, because Sudan is a predominantly Arab state, but it's Arab in the sense of their language, culture, and religion. Like, it's a Muslim country. The last civil war was fought on religious grounds a lot, because the South Sudan, which is now its own state, is mainly like animistic faith and Christianity. The rest of Sudan, and what's left now, is almost all religion, but that still leaves different ethnic tensions. And the principal tension is this concept of being a sedentary African tribe or a nomadic Arab tribe. And so the ruling class are mainly these nomadic and sedentary Arab tribes along the Nile. And those are who the British, because Sudan has the Nile, it's often referred to as the potential breadbasket of the Arab world because it is in theory home to such arable land, but they are experiencing famine because they are constantly marred by civil war. And these tensions that were exacerbated by colonialism, because the British pick and choose winners and losers of ethnic groups and like pick to see who will be their collaborator in rule. And they pick these Arab tribes by the Nile. And the central tension among much of this is like who gets to rule, which of these Arab tribes gets to rule. And not everyone in Sudan is even Arab. Arab is like this identifying force that like after trade and conquest and missionaries from the caliphates and from these Islamic countries brought Islam to Sudan, many people over like centuries started to identify as Arab and like adopt that culture and that language. But there are still some Muslims in Sudan, mainly in that western Darfur region and around the city of Al-Fashir that's been the site of genocide, are African sedentary peoples who are Muslim but are not Arab. Those are the people being subjected to genocide because there's like this hierarchy in the region. Because again, remember, like Sudanese, not really a concept. Before colonialism. To be Sudanese was not a thing because there are hundreds of different ethnicities. Sudan is also especially geometric in the way the lines were just drawn to protect Egypt, to protect other African colonies the British wanted to protect, to draw a line between Sudan and the British colonies and Chad, its border, which was a French colony. All of this, like, exacerbated by colonialism, but the central tension of Arab versus non-Arab African, even though all of these people groups largely share the same, like, DNA, is not a colonial one. It's just exacerbated by that, but it's long-standing. But when you draw these arbitrary boundaries, obviously it makes things worse. And the genocide is being conducted against sedentary tribes because what else is a problem between a culture that is largely nomadic and one that is sedentary? When you mash those people together and then you throw in a traditional British understanding of land ownership, that creates a huge problem. Because for nomadic people, which many of these Arab tribes that rule over were, land ownership isn't a thing. It's like land usage. Like, you come back to the same area, but you continuously move. For a sedentary African people, that's different. Totally different. Like, you control this land, but maybe you have what in a Western concept would be an easement where these nomadic tribes can come. But when the British come and throw in this concept of permanent land ownership, it totally changes the dynamic, and this, like, long-standing resentment begins to fester between these different people groups and the ruling Arab class. And so you have this tension that's being exploited by Hemeti and these rapid support forces to allow them to basically assault and pillage their way through the western half of the country, as they conduct genocide, what the government of the United States and the UN has called genocide. And at the same time, it's not as though the government led by General al-Burhan and the Sudanese armed forces is much better. They oppress people. They were oppressing people before the civil war started. They murder. They conduct airstrikes at will. They use drones and, like, without regard to civilian casualty. And so it's just an utter tragedy. And yet nobody talks about it. And nobody talks about it, I think, for a few reasons, none justified. Because A, it's not like governments, the world organizations like the UN don't know about it. They do. It's a tricky situation to figure out what to do when you have two sides committing war crimes. But that doesn't mean you do nothing. And also, I think there's this weird dynamic in the world where, and this isn't to say that you personally need to comment on every single atrocity being happening in the world at all times, or that you should even know. I think this is a hard thing to understand. Like, I think even me explaining it was kind of hard to understand, but it's like, it's hard to get information about. And so when something's harder to get information about and it's, like, not being fed to us because it's, like, not a safe place for a journalist to be, that's one thing. But then also I think we have, like, fatigue. Like, because if you remember 20 years ago, Darfur and the genocide happening, which the exact same genocide is happening now as was happening then, was like the cause du jour of celebrities. And it's like almost as though they, like, oh, we did that, and so now it's fatigue. I think there's also something to be said about, like, here's an African nation in a place far away with people that maybe Westerners can't identify with. And that's tragic in itself, and that's not justified. But